Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. Excited to be joined across the way by Mr. Jeff Abercrombie. Jeff, welcome back. College football regular season is over. Bowl season is soon to kick off. The playoff is set. Another week in the books in the NFL. People are declaring. People are going back to school. A lot to talk about. Excited you're here with me tonight.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. I mean, your fantasy playoffs are here, so everybody's excited about that. You know, we've got NFL playoffs and, all the potential matchup implications. And then we've got, pretty much, just a little bit left of college football, right? Bowl season for a few teams is like one more game, couple more for those in the playoffs, and it's really, you see it now, players gearing up for the off season, getting ready to go into the draft, or maybe thinking about where their future is, maybe somewhere else. So, why don't we maybe get into that a little bit, and why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so last week I talked about some guys that had entered the transfer portal. If there's anybody who I brought up last week, obviously a couple big names that I mentioned last week, DJ Ulangalea, Devin Leary. Those are like the two biggest names, I think. But there was a couple other guys I know you were a little intrigued with. I believe the wide receiver from Arizona. So if you want to circle back to any of them while we're talking transfer portal here, feel free. But the big ones that have came out since I recorded last week was quarterback Grayson McCall out of Coastal Carolina. And this was a guy who came into this season, round 3, round 4 buzz, very similar to like Aiden O'Connell out of Purdue, Devin Leary out of NC State. This year didn't go as well. Going to enter the transfer portal, see, if he can kind of, jump start again his draft stock, down the line and maybe in the right situation. Quarterback JT Daniels transferring again. I mean, I'm not sure how many times this guy's going to move around the country. The former major big time recruit just, has, adult West Virginia would be the last stop. It didn't really materialize there either. Now he's going to try somewhere else. Quarterback Brennan Armstrong, he was looked at as a 3rd, 4th round guy by some people. I didn't like him as much, but some people did, in the pre-draft process, before the season started out of Virginia. He's transferring. And then JoJo Early leaving Alabama after he came there from Texas. He was a former big-time recruit. And then I think the one that's most intriguing to me from this week is tight end, offensive weapon, Jaheim Bell. We talked about him a couple weeks ago when he got like a lot of rushing carries. Surprised that with the success we've seen of Chigakonkwo recently in the NFL, I'm surprised Jaheim Bell's not going to go the route of going to the NFL, hoping he could be an early date pick and be used as that like Swiss Army knife type player. He's going to stay in college, enter the transfer portal, maybe try to find his way to a bigger program in South Carolina, maybe a place where he's featured a little bit more. But I thought that stood out. So, Jeff, any thoughts on any of the transfer portal guys from this week, or maybe circling back to some of the bigger names that I talked about last week?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about JoJo Early, but I think this is, it's just something funny in Alabama right now. I think he's one of several players leaving. Is not what you normally see, right? You normally see them going towards Alabama, picking that destination as a place to launch their, trip to their NFL careers. So I think that's an interesting thing that I'm monitoring, because we know Alabama didn't, I'd say they had a disappointing season from what we, expect from them. And I don't know, I find that very intriguing. So it's something that I'm willing to monitor. And it just in general, the transfer portals, like we wouldn't have had this segment or this conversation at all in, several years ago, because transferring was a major decision that forced you to sit out. It was really going to put your future on ice for a bit. And, the opportunities that, these players are chasing, it's hard when you see someone like JT Daniels, bounce around. It's almost reminiscent of, players in the NFL kind of jumping back and forth on practice squads. And, it's not typical. Typically, if you're a really good player, you're going to have a home, and they're going to build it around you. And so I think that's just, that's one of those things for JT Daniels. I hope he finds, some Bo Nix style success, right? Like Bo Nix is a guy we haven't talked enough about, but who's, really stepped up his game, transferring out to Oregon and having a great year. So, that's, it's sort of, I don't want to call them like long shots, they can go somewhere and play really well. But I think it's just as likely that, we'll see it, the JT Daniels pattern too, right? So I mean, I don't know if there's, I think Jaheim Bell is a very interesting name. I think all of these are good players. I don't know if any of them are ones that, I'm particularly keeping my eye on. I mean, I think JoJo early a little bit, but is there anything, any names in here that you're just like, their talent, that coming in, is something, you're still holding a flame and hoping to see something big with their moves.
Yeah, I mean, I think this year, while there's going to be a tons of movement, I don't think we're going to have the major names that shook the college football landscape last year, right? Because we had Caleb Williams and we had Addison, and we had other guys heading over to USC to go with Lincoln Riley, and we had Jahmyr Gibbs going to Alabama and Zach Evans transferring to Ole Miss, right? So I think the star power of the transfer portal last year is going to be far superior to what we've seen this year. I don't think any of these guys that have made the move right now are guys that anybody's looking at as currently they are looked at as top 50 or top even 100 NFL draft prospects. So while there's a lot of movement, it's almost like the new version of free agency, but for college football, we don't have the big names just yet. Now, maybe there's going to still be some shoes to drop and we might get some, down the line a little bit. But right now, while there's been a lot of names, it hasn't been star power names like we saw last year. So I think that's a little bit of the difference, and no one getting me really excited. Like last year, we were excited by a handful of guys.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of like the NFL quarterback movement last year too. Just quite an anomaly. I mean, you did mention him last week. You did mention he's I'm a fan of his. I do think Dorian Singer should be getting more love just for as far as his level of play goes. It's probably just being on an Arizona team on the West Coast. We're not talking about USC. We're not talking about a ranked UCLA team or Oregon team, right? We're not talking about Michael Penix Jr. or any of his receivers, as he's, trying to play his way to a Heisman kind of season. So he's just kind of tolling away down in Arizona, which, I think is a pretty good offense. They've got really good receivers there. And, I do think his decision to transfer is interesting. I'm certain he could try to find some better quarterback play. And one of the rumored destinations there is USC, which, I'd be quite fascinated with. And, if you're, I don't know, what the kind of tampering rules are around college football, but, if you think you're going to be able to get to USC and play with Caleb Williams, it's probably a good career move.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it'd be interesting to see, where some of the guys settle in terms of their new homes. I think DJ Uiagalelei is going to be an interesting one. Where does he go? Does he get an opportunity? Can he rebuild up his draft stock a little bit in the right destination? Like if he goes somewhere and, we've seen guys like Hendon Hooker and Michael Penix and Bo Nix really perform well in their new destinations. Well, if Uiagalelei could do that on top of the raw tools that he possesses, maybe he can get himself back in at least the day two mix, where right now I think if he declared, he'd be more of like a team taking a shot on him probably somewhere on day three, just because of the traits or the tools. It'll be interesting to kind of see. Before we talk about some of the guys who have officially declared, any thoughts, Jeff, on the guys who have chose to return in terms of the big names? You mentioned Michael Penix. I talked about him last week. He's coming back. Just recently in the last couple of days, Jermaine Burton, staying in college at Alabama. I think that's a good decision for him. And then the big one that I talked about last week that I'd love to get your quick takes on is Kayshon Boutte, right? Like my guess, I mean, 'cause remember the first week of the season, we were like, he's out. Like, is he going to leave LSU right now?
Yeah.
And start just getting ready for the NFL draft when we just didn't seem like it was the right fit, right coach. And now all of a sudden he's going back to school. So I thought that was a really interesting one. I think he might have somebody in his ear saying, listen, your stock has fallen hard. You're not even a top 50 pick right now. And he's looking at it as I got to go back to school and I got to try to fix this.
I do kind of find it hard to believe he would have fallen out of round 2, top 50-ish. I really think, he's talented enough, and he played big. He played big in big enough games that, I think NFL teams would have taken a shot at him, mid-ish round 2, mid-late. But maybe he has higher aspirations for himself, and I'm not going to hold that against him. He probably thinks he's a top 20, top 15 pick, the best receiver, in a class, and he has a capability to be that. I don't know if returning to LSU is really the decision that's going to get him there, but I think that is a path, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if we're talking about Kayshon Boutte as a round 1 wide receiver next year. I also wouldn't be shocked if we're talking about Kayshon Boutte as a borderline round 2-3 guy next year. If he kind of has another of the same seasons, it almost might hurt his draft stock a little bit. I just don't see it falling out of the top 75 picks, and it's probably I think you spelled it really well last week. He's a round 2 guy, and I think he's looking for more, and that's really what he's going for. I think it's the same thing with Michael Penix. I mean, we had Eric on the show. He's a huge fan. We had a great conversation about him. Why not him? If Levis is a first round pick, why not Penix? And and honestly, I just it's probably the same kind of situation for that. He finally had a healthy year where he put everything together on tape year 1, and maybe it's just that NFL teams might have a little bit of concerns around injury durability. If he puts that one more year behind him, if he stacks seasons like this, he's one where immediately on my watch list as a potential first rounder for next year. Now, I mean, again, he has to basically repeat this season. I think maybe show some more growth, maybe more NFL decision making. I mean, he'll be an older prospect, an older draft, prospect going into the draft, but if he polishes up his game, I certainly see, a team willing to take a shot on him. I probably like the Steelers did with Kenny Pickett. And, I think a team could even be happier with Penix than maybe the Steelers will end up being with Pickett. It's all projection, but I do think he's taken some great steps forward. The healthy season is a big deal. I'm a little bit, I'm curious about what went into his decision to turn back into the draft. And it does make me think he probably was a late day 2 kind of grade, maybe from the NFL draft advisory committee. So, and he's probably thinking I can play my way into a bigger role. And yeah, I mean, I think Jermaine Burton just, we just didn't see enough from him. And I don't think he felt like he put enough out there too. And so I think it's just I'll still hold a flame because I think he's shown talent when, he's been out there, but his transition wasn't an easy one. And so, maybe another year in a system and hopefully we see a big explosion year for him next year.
Yeah, and the thing with Burton is it's not like he has elite level like athletic traits. Like he would go to the combine and run like a 4.28 or 4.34 at his size. That would basically make people almost forget that he didn't really have a great year this year at Alabama, and he would just be drafted based on traits. So not having that elite athletic ceiling nor the production at Alabama, I think was the smart decision. Penix, it's interesting, right? Because we said this quarterback class is a little bit up in the air. I would have thought that maybe he would have seen that this is an opportunity to strike while there is some uncertainty. But if he thinks another full year production and health, maybe that would ease some of the concerns in the NFL's eyes, because I think they care a little bit less about age when we're talking quarterbacks.
Mhm.
So I think if they believe someone could be a franchise quarterback or a starting NFL quarterback, they're not going to push them down because of age. I think
Yeah,
we've
I think
just
so.
seen that enough. So maybe he's saying, I go back, I have another show. If I have another healthy year and produce, maybe I
He
can
just
get in that
can't.
top 50
He
mix.
he just can't be a project going in. That
Yeah.
is my thought. He'll have to show some polish that for an NFL team to think that he will be able to step in for them year one if they need to, and maybe maybe right away is the plan. But even most teams probably unless they're picking in the top 5, and they don't have a quarterback, most teams I don't think want to immediately turn to a rookie, right? So they'll draft him thinking, you know, we probably have a guy that we think we think Penix is going to be the future. Let's see. He seems to be mostly ready, and there's going to be a time where he has to step in, and so they're going to kind of look for that year one, right?
Yeah. And speaking of, this is the perfect transition. Speaking of development, progress, a team not wanting to put him in the mix right away, the top of the heap here in terms of declarations. I gave my take on it last week, so I wanted to get yours before we talked about some of the other guys. Anthony Richardson, everything seemed to be pointing towards it would make sense for him to go back to school, but he's coming out, and a lot of people seem to think he's going round 1. Obviously, my thoughts on
I
him,
love it.
high level traits. I'm intrigued by him. I was intrigued by Malik Willis, right? Who ended up falling to the 3rd round, but I thought could have went late round 1. But this is a guy who played at a much higher level of competition. He's got more of the size prototype. Malik Willis didn't have that. He's got that elite athletic ability. I think he's got better natural arm talent than Willis. Is there tons of growth and development needed? For sure. I think he's going to end up going round 1. And I know you mentioned it a while ago on Twitter. If the NFL loves Will Levis, who has all these things that he's got to work on and develop, well, why are they also going to love Anthony Richardson, who basically, if you're talking about a checklist of traits, Anthony Richardson, every trait physically is superior to Will Levis.
Yeah, I think the only box that Levis might check, take, have better than Richardson is a perfect pocket deep ball. And that's it. Like it has conditions have to be perfect, and Levis can chuck it, 60 yards, on a line, on a dime, and place it exactly where it needs to go. Like, but that's not always that's rarely going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously, like I'm not saying Richardson's like a polished prospect or anything like that, but yeah, I mean, I think he's a better athlete. I think he's a better problem solver. I love his decision to go into the NFL this year. I think he will be a round 1 pick, and I actually, we know the mold. We've seen it now multiple times, right? Like we've seen it with Hurts, we've seen it with Kyler, we've seen it with Fields, we've seen it with Lamar. Like if having a level of mobility that can help your team, without having to throw it and sort of be that NFL sort of prototype pocket passer, right? I mean, I do say it. Games are won and lost from the pocket, and I'll still hold by that. Like if you can't play in the pocket, I think your time in the NFL is going to be short. But that doesn't mean you have to be able to do it right away. I mean, we've seen that blueprint, and when coaches are willing to let a player operate in a way where he uses what his affordances are, to achieve the goal that needs to be there. It doesn't have to be sort of like if it's a Kyle Shanahan, that would rub him the wrong way, and it would never work, despite how much of a genius Shanahan is. But as far as play design, but like if you give it to a guy like Dayball, who we've already seen implement that type of strategy with Josh Allen, and ask him to be the NFL quarterback, realize his plate's a little bit too full, pare it back for him and let him do what he does best, and then learn his limitations and sort of grow with what he's capable of. Like that's the kind of thing that Anthony Richardson will thrive in a situation like that. And so it will depend. Like I think Malik Willis going to Tennessee, it does not seem like Vrabel is the most flexible coach and wants Malik Willis to play a certain way and doesn't trust him. And I mean, we heard all of that in the preseason. I know Vrabel's a good coach. I know he develops players. We'll see what the long-term, result of all of that is. But, it will depend on Richardson finding a good landing spot. I mean, I think the Lions would be a great landing spot as well. Dan Campbell had Taysom Hill back down there for a while. Like, I mean, he got to learn under Sean Payton. I think that's a great creative mind. Maybe Sean Payton goes to the NFL and drafts Anthony Richardson. I don't know. Although he praised Caleb Williams recently, so maybe he's waiting one more year, for his return. In short, because I've talked about it a lot. I absolutely love it. I can't wait to see, to see his off season and where he ends up. And maybe just, I know we all love him. Matt Waldman's been putting together a lot of content. I think he's starting to really dig into his RSP scouting and he's been putting a lot of cut-ups on Twitter, and he's got some love. He's got some love for guys like Anthony Richardson. He has some love for one of my favorites, Jake Hayner, out there. So it's when it comes to looking up and kind of seeing who a prospect is, I would recommend his account's pretty good for that. So
yeah, for sure.
If you want to see Anthony Richardson love, you'll find it on his timeline.
Yeah, for sure. And we always love having Matt join us pre-draft, post-draft. So it'll be fun talking to Anthony Richardson with him for sure. Pre-draft and then post-draft once we know where he is headed after the NFL draft. Let me rattle off a couple of the other big names, and then I'll get some quick thoughts, and then you can pick or choose, one or two that you want to share something on. The other big quarterback this week, Tanner McKee out of Stanford, is declaring. Right now, I think he's probably somewhere in the day 2 range. I know Dane Brugler still is pretty high on him. McKee didn't have the year that I think people expected. Stanford just as a whole kind of down, but if somebody likes the traits of him and isolates it away from the disaster that was Stanford this year, maybe he's a guy that, can get pushed up a little bit there in terms of Tanner McKee. Running backs, Tank Bigsby and Devin Achane declared. Achane, not a surprise. I think he's locked in as the third RB after Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. Tank's an interesting one, right? Because I thought he might have been one of those guys that maybe would have entered the portal and found the landing spot and just had a monster final year and then came out. But he's thrown his hat into the mix. I still think he'll be a day 2 guy for sure. Wide receiver, Josh Downs. I think he's probably ticketed for a top 50 type player. If Wan'Dell's going top 50, if Jahan Dotson's going in the first round, I think Josh Downs falls somewhere between those two, archetypes in terms of draft capital. Smith-Njigba, we'll see. I think he still goes round 1, but I think there's more question marks about Jackson Smith-Njigba than there has been about other Ohio State wide receivers, especially not playing it all this year. Those questions still linger. Is he slot only? How much can he play outside? He's probably going to be a mediocre tester in terms of the 40 and stuff like that. So he officially declared. Jadon Hasselwood, who I feel like he's been in college forever. He's coming out of Arkansas. Parker Washington out of Penn State, who I didn't think lived up to the hype this year that some people really were putting on him, especially in the Devy community. He's probably around 3, round 4 type guy. Dontavian Wicks out of Virginia. He's another one that pre-draft buzz in the summer was more like a round 3, round 4 guy, one of the top older wide receivers. And then at the tight end position, Michael Mayer, we knew he was coming out, clear tight end 1, one of 2 guys who could go in round 1 in terms of tight ends, him and Darnell Washington. Tucker Kraft at a small school, South Dakota State. I think he's going early day 2. So I think we might have 3 tight ends in like the top 40 or top 50 picks. And then Luke Musgrave, the NFL seems to really like him. The guys who are on the intel seem to really like him. He doesn't have a lot of production to match it up, but Luke Musgrave is a guy who I feel like we're going to be talking a lot about because the NFL seems to really be intrigued with him, even though he doesn't really have the production. He was on Bruce Feldman's Freak List back in the summer. Now he's declaring. I think he probably has some intel that teams are intrigued with him, even though he doesn't have the collegiate, receiving production. NFL must like him and think, he's in that round 3 mix, maybe early round 4 for him to declare. So, Jeff, any thoughts? Anybody from that list kind of stand out? You want to share 1 or 2 thoughts maybe on a guy?
I'm just going to keep following which running backs. It has the potential to be a pretty stacked class. I don't think that's necessarily going to stop teams from taking them where they should. And I think we're talking a bunch of names round 2. I have said, I wonder if we are going to get a record number of running backs. I know, we've had that conversation, and I think, we've landed very much so that, if there's a lot of good options, teams might wait till day 3 round, but I don't think it's crazy, that, I look back and I think, a couple decades ago, we hit like 11 running backs into draft class, like once, and I think if we get 10, 11 running backs, that's going to be a very high year, for the NFL draft. And I really think that that's, not crazy.
Yeah, so it's gonna be interesting to kind of see how it plays out, with the position, and a lot of high end guys, right? We like the class. We'll still see, still wait and see on like Zach Evans and other guys making an official. But Tank's in there, A-Chain's in there. 2 guys we'll be talking a lot about over the coming months. Let's take this to the NFL rookie report for this past week. Only a couple names kind of stand out that I kind of want to pick your brain on. One, Jameson Williams returns. Nice to see him back. 2 weeks ago, he made his debut. He only played a couple snaps. This past week, defense kind of forgot to cover him, but it was nice to see him find the end zone, 41-yard touchdown pass. It'd be interesting to kind of see him down the closing stretch of this year, especially if Detroit's really playing well. And Goff is showing a little bit more in terms of vertical ability, in terms of passing acumen. Kind of see how they integrate Jameson Williams this year, but really just a little, this is more of a little teaser this year for Jameson Williams. And then next year we could really see him break out. Pair of Patriots rookie running backs how they got thrown into the mix last night on Monday Night Football due to Damian Harris being inactive last night due to injury, and then Ramondre Stevenson getting hurt. Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris both scored touchdowns last night. I think the interesting question there would be, if we're assuming Damian Harris is not with the Patriots next year, which I think is a pretty safe assumption. We know the Patriots like to use multiple guys. Do you have a preference, Jeff, in terms of Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris? One's more of the bruising, physical, interior guy. One's more of the space, outside type guy. It'd be interesting to kind of see what the dynasty, maybe in fantasy community, thinks about who could be Ramondre's running mate next year. And then Brock Purdy, obviously, you follow the Niners closely, has stepped in 2 really efficient performances over the last 2 weeks, 185 yards, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, had to ask your thoughts on Brock Purdy and what you've been seeing with him.
Yeah, I mean, Jameson Williams, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's more to come. And he's a dynamic player, so his snaps are starting to increase. DJ Chark's playing well, so I don't think he's going to just take over this year, but I think Detroit just wants him to get some experience so that he can come in next year and really help that team take off. I don't know that between Strong and Harris that there's really anybody that I think is going to become a major sort of sneaky buy, great value. We've seen Damian Harris, out this year, both those guys on the roster, and Ramondre Stevenson is the guy. I mean, we've talked about him as a buy and sending first round picks, and and him in his place in the dynasty running back ranks of RB1 kind of guy. I know the Patriots run multiple running backs out there, but I don't think it's I don't think they're going to force it if Ramondre's playing as well as he is. And so I think I've been on the Pierre Strong side of this, when we were looking at them as rookies, when we were evaluating the draft classes and who might be able to make more impacts. I think Strong has a little bit more upside as a receiver, but again, Ramondre can do all of that. And so I don't think there's anything specifically that, I think those guys are going to be like little siphons, out of giant Ramondre pie. Strong a PPR side, Kevin a little goal line vulture here and there, but but I think it's going to really be the Ramondre show. Let's just have a Brock Purdy party, right? It is strange to see. It is strange to see this. I knew the 49ers weren't going to go after Baker Mayfield. It just, that wasn't a connection that wasn't going to, work. I think he'd have done fine with Shanahan, but they like what they have in house. And I guess you kind of see why. We're grading on a curve here, and Purdy has sort of like a cheat sheet because he's got the Shanahan offense, and he just has to tell him where to look, and he's going to have a read, high low, there's going to be a linebacker in conflict. Where's he go? Go the other way. We're going to attack. We're going to attack the defense this way, and there's going to be a window in the zone, on your third drop. If not, hit the check down to Christian McCaffrey. It's one of those things where like the offense is is clicking extremely well because the team around him is executing, but that really shouldn't take away from Purdy because you still need a conductor, and he stepped in extremely well. I have to temper a little bit of expectations here. We've seen, Nick Mullins, step in when Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt a few years back and, run the offense for, 3, 4, 5 games really well, and then kind of show his limitations. And Purdy has his own limitations. He's not going to be someone who's, his arm, isn't that of, a top level NFL quarterback. He can make the reads. He can get the ball out where it needs to go. But I do think unless we see some level, unless you see some level of growth in the tools, right? Like I think Brady was a really good example of a player with limitations who improved on those in just a rare way. Like Tom Brady's arm strength got better as he progressed through the NFL. Usually you don't see something like that. And so, that's not what I will expect with Brock Purdy, but I do think he could be, a really, really good point guard who makes sound decisions, and in a Shanahan offense that can keep the lights on. So, we'll see where it goes. It's probably him for the rest of the playoffs. I think the defense is what's going to carry them as far as it can go. You're on mute, Paul.
It's interesting how well he's performed in that system. And this is why, right? Like I was talking about it last week, right? It's why a guy like Stetson Bennett might draw some attention. It's, it's not only about high level traits. That's the guys at the top of the draft. But as we're seeing Brock Purdy, as we've seen other guys, right? Colt McCoy, has had some moments for Arizona that he's looked competent, and
Jake Haener coming in.
Yeah. So it's not just about the guys at the top. And what really this for another day when we really have a lot of time, right? It does open, I think, the question, and we'll never know the true answer, was Kyle Shanahan really intrigued with Mac Jones to think he could be a better version of Jimmy Garoppolo, a better version of what we're seeing out of Brock Purdy, run his offense, smart, get it out quick, be that point guard? And then was he swayed by other people to go the high upside guy of Trey Lance? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe it was always Trey Lance. Maybe it was supposed to be Mac Jones at first. Because it does seem like Kyle Shanahan really liked Kirk Cousins, really like Matt Ryan, right? A type of guys who can be that type of distributor for him. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting question.
Go back, you look at my timeline, you will see, my whole conspiracy theory wall, connecting all the dots and it not making, the national media just not making sense with it all. he's on record saying, here's where I fall with Shanahan. He needs somebody who can make the reads, right? Like if you can't make the reads, and that's probably why he was off on Justin Fields, right? If you're having trouble making the reads on time, timing and rhythm quarterback, if you're having trouble doing that, you're going to have a trouble running the offense, regardless of how, athletic you are. He couldn't draft an Anthony Richardson. He couldn't have developed Josh Allen, into the player he is. Heck, even Patrick Mahomes, may not have meshed the best with him. But, that being said, he's on record saying, yeah, you have to have all these other things, but like if you can pair that, if you can pair, Drew Brees, with the legs of Cam Newton, why wouldn't you do that? Like that just gives you so many more options. And we know he's such a great run game scheme, strategist, and having that threat, opens up doors. I'm sure he liked Mac Jones. I'm sure he thought Mac Jones would be a great, a very good NFL quarterback, but I don't think that, I think he had a, some love for Trey Lance. I think that he saw him as his project, and sort of his path to an evolved offense. Like, his offense has been wonderful seeing him and McVay go back and forth and like, the evolution of these offenses, and Shanahan has managed to continue to, to evolve the offense and get better and kind of adapt to what defenses do. He's done that really well. And he can't just be stagnant and do what he does well and sit back with a Kirk Cousins kind of guy. And I think he realizes that. And I think that's why we got to Trey Lance when we did. I don't think he's upset that Trey Lance is in the building. I mean, look at Mac Jones, it's not that, he's a bad prospect, but it's, he's got a ceiling to him that's not as high. I mean, and we could just even look, we talked about, it's not all about these kind of top end talents, like, and who's looking good, Purdy looking good in Shanahan's system. I mean, Tua's looking good in Miami, right? Like, these offenses are set up, for success, if you can understand the offense at, a high enough level. Like, I don't think an average understanding of NFL schemes and offenses in the quarterback position will necessarily work. And I don't think that's what, he'd want people to catch up with, right? Like he doesn't want to catch people up with understanding the offense. You need to be there mentally. And then whatever else you can bring, he's going to build around that. Yeah, I think it's a great strategy for any team.
Yeah, right there. And then that's why I think he was intrigued with Trey Lance, the possibility of what extra he could bring to that offense, to his scheme. And, hopefully next year we get a healthy Trey Lance, we get a developed Trey Lance, and maybe we finally get to start to see it. And the way we have gotten excited over Justin Fields at times this year, the way that we've gotten excited at moments of Trevor Lawrence this year, hopefully we're adding into the mix Trey Lance next year, and that 3-pack of quarterbacks from that class that we were so excited for. Hopefully we're seeing them as a next wave of really good quarterback play, at the next level. Let's take this to the Dynasty Stock Report, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about guys as the NFL season concludes, as there's not a lot of college games to digest in the month of December here. But I have a 5-pack here I want to run through real quick. 3 number quarterback questions, and then a running back and receiver. A couple are repeats from last week that I wanted to pick your brain on. So let's start with the quarterbacks. First off, I had the conversation last week that I wanted to ask you. Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, I think they should be neck and neck in people's dynasty ranks. I think you can make the case for Joe Burrow. There seems to be a little bit more of a separation than I'm comfortable with. I'm interested to know that, where do you stand on that? Do you think, the industry's off a little bit there? That's the first quarterback question. 2, are we at the point now? I brought this up early in the year, but now the whole year's, we're concluding. are we at the point now where QB Dynasty rankings should go Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen in some order, and then Jalen Hurts? Because I do think it's now a legitimate question moving forward. There's no more debate about whether he's the guy. He's the guy in Philadelphia. It's no more they're going to pull the rug out from underneath him. They're going to ride or die with Jalen Hurts for a while, I think now. So now that's safe. His passing is improved substantially, and he's got the running capabilities. He's stacked with receivers. I think it's a legitimate question. And then third, how do we appropriately value Deshaun Watson? Because I feel like people want to kind of pencil him right back in top 8, top 7. I mean, he's been terrible so far. It's been years since he played. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a development curve back needed. But how do we handle him in Dynasty?
Yeah. With Herbert and Burrow, I do think, whether you have analysts kind of having a difference or rankings somewhere having a difference, I think if you're, just in any general league, I think they're going to be extremely close. I think some leagues will even just have Burrow because of his, his season, and you have Higgins and Chase there. And in my mind, if I were starting a franchise, for example, and I think that's an okay lens to view as your dynasty teams, but I would pick Justin Herbert because I think he can do things Joe Burrow can't. If I will just point back to that, Raiders game last year with the playoff, the winning in, and just the fourth down conversions, fourth quarter, just the types of throws Herbert was making. I think he was hurt that game too. There was the game that he had maybe that was this year, he had the cracked rib and he, still threw a dart over the middle to Mike Williams. Like, the arm talent, behind Justin Herbert is in a special category that I don't think Burrow quite has. It's not a knock on Burrow. I think he's going to be an extremely good quarterback, and his situation's so much better right now. I mean, he's got Higgins and he's got Chase, and they're married, long-term with those guys for at least the next few years. It's just that situations can change, right? And I'll roll that into kind of Jalen Hurts' QB3 in Dynasty. I mean, Jalen Hurts has A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. Injuries happen. We see it with Lamar, right? My biggest hesitancy of does Jalen Hurts deserve to be QB3 is, we go back and we look at, okay, who were ahead of him, right? Like if you talked about Justin Herbert, well, he was injured and his offensive line was injured and, his receivers have been injured all year. Like, it's not like he's had a lot to work with. Those things happen. Like Lamar, he's been hurt. He's had no receivers to throw to. Does it mean, is this an indictment? Has Lamar taken a step back? No, it just, you have to have a recipe for success that includes the talent of your quarterback, but it includes a lot of other things too. And I think that's why we see, shuffling in, sort of the order. Sometimes the guy's 3, sometimes he's 8, sometimes he has a good year, then kind of follows up with a down year. They shuffle around in their general tiers. And so I think Jalen Hurts deserves to be in that tier. And if you took him as QB3, I wouldn't have an issue with it. But if you took Burrow, if you took Lamar, if you took Herbert, if you took Kyler, I know the injury there adds a lot of uncertainty, but he is still a very creative and unique and playmaking quarterback. I really don't have a big issue. I think Trevor Lawrence is starting to play his way there. And, if Calvin Ridley is the player he was when he left, and if he hasn't skipped a beat himself, I think Trevor Lawrence could be put into a top 5 kind of conversation too. And so we're talking about there's Patrick Mahomes, there's Josh Allen, and then there's, a half a dozen or so, really good options in a tier there that you want one to build around. And I'm happy with that. I talked about Calvin Ridley being off and hopefully he is who he was to help elevate Trevor Lawrence. This Deshaun Watson, I think there's enough precedence for, players missing some time and then being able to come back and find their feet again. And I think that most likely the situation that we're going to see with Deshaun Watson. Seeing the absolute and utter collapse of Russell Wilson, is opened my eyes to a possibility Deshaun Watson never never returns to his level of play. I never would have thought of that, for players of that caliber. Like, I think Russell Wilson had played at a Hall of Fame level in Seattle, and I would never have thought that a Hall of Fame level quarterback could disintegrate and be so fragile about a situation like that. And, here we are. And that's, maybe that's the situation with Watson too. And I don't even think Watson was quite at, Russ's level. So that possibility is there, but I would still value him as if he's going to come back and probably be, look, there's a lot more high end fantasy quarterbacks, especially with the rushing, upside, that, Watson had finished kind of QB5, all, several years in a row in Houston. I think there's enough high level fantasy options that, I don't think QB5 is necessarily, a trustworthy finish, but he's going to be a good, I would assume and value him as if he's going to be a good player with, a moderate risk discount that you're probably going to get if you try to trade for him.
Yeah, I think all those points there are really valid. I think it does get a little bit muddled after, I think, the top two quarterbacks, because there really are a lot of really good options who got youth on their side and rushing capabilities or elite level arm talent, and I do think Deshaun Watson will find his way back. But as you mentioned, you just never know, right? We just don't know. Like, quarterback is such a mental thing, so much in terms of playing confident. Has he lost his confidence? Can he just get it back? Does it take one good game? And then, I think those are things that, not being in the mind of a high level athlete, it's hard for us to kind of process that and know. And I don't think we're going to see it this year. I think we might be, maybe if we see him return, it might not be till next year. So it's really going to make things interesting for the fantasy community to kind of appropriately value him in this offseason, or if people are doing startup dynasty drafts during this offseason. I think he's a really interesting X factor if he kind of, concludes this year being very lackluster, and the Browns are lackluster and they were better with Jacoby Brissett, and he doesn't show any glimpses of that greatness. It's going to really open up more questions going into the offseason that I think it's going to put fantasy owners in a little bit of a weird spot of, do we just blindly believe that he'll get back to that, or do we start to think about the possibility that maybe he's not? And I think that's interesting. So, and I'm right there with you in terms of, I understand why people would have Herbert. I just think it should be neck and neck, him and Burrow, in terms of that. Last two guys I want to bring up, J.K. Dobbins, Diontae Johnson. J.K. Dobbins returns this past week, 100 yards. I know we have been big fans in the past. Should we get excited again? Because I am very lukewarm. I don't think the Ravens are going to go into this offseason and believe that J.K. Dobbins is the guy going into next season or long term. He's coming up on his last year of his rookie deal. I don't think they're going to look to sign him to any decent contract. I don't think they're going to feel like they could trust him with his injury history. I think the Ravens might really consider running back early in the NFL draft. I think they might think Bijan. They might think Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe they think free agency if Saquon hits the market or somebody else. I think they need to have a big-time run game there. They have been missing. They have tried to put anybody back there. It hasn't worked for them the last couple of years. So I'm lukewarm on J.K. Dobbins, even though once upon a time I was super excited. Maybe you could talk me back into him. And then Diontae Johnson, he started out this year as a top 15 type dynasty wide receiver asset. 60-something catches, 600-something yards, 0 touchdowns. We don't usually see production fall off this dramatically for a young player at his age. It's not like he went from elite level Roethlisberger to what they've had this year. He went from washed up Roethlisberger to Pickett, and not Mariota, Trubisky. I don't know what to make of Diontae Johnson. He got his money last offseason. We know he's going to be there. They shipped out Claypool. It's him. It's Pickens. I have a hard time with both Diontae Johnson, J.K. Dobbins as we head towards the home stretch of the NFL season.
Yeah, I mean, I think your reticence is probably the prudent approach here. Some level, approach them with some level of tempered expectations. I do think there's upside there, but I don't, even when J.K. Dobbins has been kind of healthy, I mean, he hasn't been a 70% kind of guy or even 60%. Like, he has been a 50% of the, backfield type of player. And that's sort of how Baltimore has kind of seen him and used him. Even again, I think this past weekend, it was 50% him and 50% Gus Edwards. It's just that, Dobbins was able to break more runs, get a little bit more yardage, get the touchdown. I think you're going to see them complement each other. Those ACLs really, really threw wrenches into the Ravens' plans. And I think if you have both of those guys, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, healthy at the start of the year and ready to go, because that wasn't the case this year. They weren't healthy and ready to go. They were on the PUP list, or there was some questions and when they'd be back, and not 100% off their recovery. Look, if they're 100% healthy going into a season, I think you're going to feel okay about it, especially when you have so many other needs. Like, I don't know how you can invest in when you have J.K. Dobbins still on a rookie deal, when you still have Gus Edwards as sort of his restricted free agent or, a UDFA kind of contract, that you're going to go in and put another asset, to the running back room with a high draft capital when you really need to invest in, Lamar Jackson, invest in a more diverse passing game. That's what's been the biggest problem. I mean, their running game hasn't been great, but they've been throwing to like Demarcus Robinson. They've been throwing to, Devin Duvernay is their best player, and he's kind of had a few schemed looks. It's been a really rough go for them, and I just, I don't see how they, I don't see how they just not make the passing game, in defense sort of their focal point. They'll probably try to add to the room. Nobody goes in with a thin depth chart. No teams want to go in with a thin depth chart. So they'll probably add somebody. And this is a great running back class. So, even if they get a guy in day 3, I think there's some really good opportunity there, but it's not going to be one guy taking things over. I don't think they'll invest in Bijan because, I think they're a rotation kind of team. And I don't think they're going to get a Saquon or a Bijan that they're going to just, put in there for 80% of snaps. I could be wrong. Teams do change. They decide to change their philosophy, but I would do it different. And if I'm going to guess and I'm going to project things for the offseason, I do think it'll probably go a little bit different than that.
I was just gonna say, I think they're clearly missing Hollywood Brown, right? I know he wanted to be traded, and they granted his request, but it's been clear that the loss of him has hurt it, and I think it's hurt Mark Andrews' production because teams are focusing in on Mark Andrews, and Bateman hasn't lived up, and there was some weird stuff going on with Bateman too, because
they were a top offense the first 3 weeks, and they had Bateman healthy, and he was even just kind of working his way into the offense. He went down and they had nobody left, to throw to besides Mark Andrews. And that's when everything, went off the rails for them. Obviously some injuries to the running game too, but just didn't help things. But there's nobody to throw to, that they looked, we forget because it's so long ago, but they looked like we were almost excited that we had elite Lamar level, like MVP level Lamar Jackson back, when we were 2-3 weeks into the season. It's just things change that fast, right? And that's why, when we go back to the quarterback discussion, just, things change so fast. We've seen AJ Brown get hurt with his knees before, right? Like if AJ Brown is gone from that Philly offense, do we still have, the secret sauce recipe for Jalen Hurts, to be as good? Can teams kind of key in on stopping him? It's just one of those things where you need a lot to go right to have a great season. And, it hasn't for the Chargers. It hasn't for the Ravens. And, I think the focus of the offseason is to make sure that, when something does go wrong, you're somewhat insulated. I mean, again, that's why I didn't think the 49ers were keen that they had to get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo, because that's the whole thing. What if something goes wrong? It's nice to have that ace in the hole, right? Most teams think that way too. We look at it, especially from like a fantasy lens, right? If you're playing fantasy football, our NFL fans, team fans of teams, like they get this, they know this, but we have, with fantasy football listeners, they look at they want the number one of the depth chart, right? And they're like, oh no, we can improve, the depth chart. Or why do they need to improve this depth chart? We have Breece Hall, right? Or we have Michael Carter. Why do we need to improve this depth chart? He's a good running back, right? And obviously, like you see how NFL teams don't. That's why Dameon Pierce is not going to be the same level of fantasy player he will next year, because teams will not, the Houston Texans will not feel good about only Dameon Pierce as the only name on their running back depth chart. They're gonna pull more people in, and they'll probably draft some people, and they could probably draft talented people to go alongside Dameon Pierce. I don't think Dameon Pierce is the level, quality athlete that will hold people off. And I think we have to think of J.K. Dobbins in that way too, where I don't think he's going to be, hold off other good players, to demand all of the work, mostly also because I just don't think the Ravens will necessarily want him to have to do that.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to kind of see how that situation plays out, but it is just again, a realization that things change very, very quickly in the NFL. Guys who are in top 15s, top 20s, right? They could fall out of favor very quickly. Things are constantly changing, in terms of rankings. Yeah, sometimes it's just reshuffling guys in the top 5 or top 10. But sometimes, like, you could have major movement in the teens, in the early 20s, year to year, half a season to another half a season. And I think we're seeing that over this NFL season for sure. Some injury related, some performance related, so it's something to always, touch base with when we're talking dynasty rankings and stuff like that. So there it is, guys. NFL Dynasty Stock Report, NFL Rookie Report, and the NFL Draft Stock Report for this week. If you are enjoying this content, please get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to visit it. Check out the premium content tab for $9.99. You get access to all of our content. Scouting notebook can have lots of updates over the next couple weeks, month. The rankings notebook, all our different rankings. We'll sort that out by the guys that declared, the guys that don't. And then the NFL draft projections notebook in April as well. We will continue to bring you weekly shows here, even with the college football season in the books. We'll check in on the bowl games, things that stood out, even though a lot of the highly decorated draft eligible guys really don't even play in these games anymore. There'll be some stuff to talk about in terms of performances. We'll have more people declaring, going back to school, entering the transfer portal. We'll take a look at the, people who have accepted invites to the All-Star Game, Shrine Bowl, and Senior Bowl as well. And then a lot of stuff, recapping the NFL year from the rookie perspective and setting the foundation for entering this offseason. So, on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, Thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.